What's going on, YouTube, and welcome to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte. Today we're going to be discussing the Boston Bruins, as the Bruins have had kind of an interesting start to their season, and we're kind of asking ourselves, is this the year that the Bruins finally fall off and miss the playoffs? Things obviously haven't gone well for the Bruins to start the season, but things aren't at a point where it's unfixable. The Bruins record right now, 6-6-1, right around 500. It's not like they're playing like god-awful, but there's definitely games here early in the season where you're like, if we could have got a little bit more, probably should have won that hockey game. So we're going to discuss the Bruins here today. Obviously, the Jim Montgomery thing and how they, decided to bench David Pastrnak earlier this week. We're going to discuss all of that. So the Boston Bruins, like I said, their record, not all that inspiring. Their goals for, 22nd in the National Hockey League, and their goals against, 24th in the league. So they're giving up goals, they're not scoring enough, and that's usually a recipe for disaster. And for the Bruins, I don't think it's a disaster, but I think for Bruins fans, the expectations have always been that this is a playoff team and a team that should be competing for a championship. Well, right now, the way things have gone, and things have slightly gotten better here over this week, but it seems like the Bruins are in a little bit of an identity shift, right? Obviously, over the last 5 or 6 years, you look at who they've lost, really since right before 2020, you've lost Zdeno Chara, Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci. Even going further back than that, the part of this culture of guys like Dennis Seidenberg, Johnny Boychuk. Now you've lost Tuukka Rask. Tuukka Rask hasn't been there. So this is just such a different team than the teams we're used to seeing in Boston. It seemed like they were able to patchwork a lot of the way there. And then once we lost Bergeron and Krejci, that was obviously something that was of concern to most of us. And the Bruins have done pretty well despite losing those two guys. I thought they would miss that first season they didn't have Bergeron and Krejci. I thought for certain the Bruins would miss the playoffs, and they didn't. And now they have this elite goaltending here from Swayman. They had really good goaltending from Ullmark, but he's off to Ottawa. So for the Boston Bruins, it seemed like they were able to just kind of patchwork their way through. And then they added Elias Lindholm this summer, which really made you believe, like, all right, now they have a legit top 6 center. This is great. Well, they do and they don't. And I think that some of the things that have been hampering the Bruins for the last couple years, I think those are finally starting to show. And even though it wasn't showing it on their record or how they played, it definitely seems like this was the year where the Bruins just are kind of falling back to reality. And you look at their top guys who are scoring. David Pastrnak has 11 points in 13 games. He's not playing bad. Same thing for Marchand. He's got 10 points. Lindholm's got 8. It's not that they're not getting, it's good to see those guys as your top point producers, but you'd like to see them have more points in general. And I think that's really more so the thing we're looking at here with the Bees is, their top guys are playing well and they're leading the stats, but they're just not over and above. And I think that's kind of why people are a little bit concerned about the Bruins for a lot of different reasons. I think the Bruins are a team that has always been so dominant, and I think the expectations in Boston are just high. And I think for this team right now, you have to realize that at some point there's going to be some sort of reset. And whether it's this year or next year, maybe it's another 2 years from now, the Bruins are going to have to really reset at some point. And that's not a bad thing. It happens to every team. And the Bruins have done a really good job at holding that off, because you consider what they've lost. Like I said earlier in the video, you consider what they lost, the fact they won a President's Trophy, went as deep in the playoffs as they have been the last couple of years. Nobody would have expected that from the Bruins just a few years ago when they lost Krejci and Pastrnak and Bergeron. That should have been it for the Bruins, right? And they should be in a rebuild right now, but they're not. And that's really what I think is inspiring, I guess, for the Bruins, is the fact, despite those things not going their way, they still found a way to get back to the playoffs and be a legit contender, even losing some of your higher end guys. It's not easy to do. And I think Jim Montgomery is obviously on the hot seat. But again, if you look at other teams around the league, they'd be okay with a 6-6-1 record. Not that they're necessarily happy with it, but you know what? This is early in the season, and it's not that big of a deal. But because he's in Boston, because he's the head coach of the Boston Bruins, the expectations are going to be higher. And for the Bruins, this is always the saying, right? It's always easier to fire a coach and bring in a new coach than to try and make a legit trade or a hockey trade just to make changes to the roster. And that's definitely what I think the Bruins would be looking at if they were to do anything here. Like I said, they've won their last 2 games. Things are starting to go back in the right direction for the Bruins. So maybe this is all just talk and it turns into nothing. But it's definitely an interesting story to keep an eye on for the Bruins, as there seems to be a little tension growing there in Boston. And for better or for worse, it could help them this season, as maybe it creates a little bit more of a bonding between the players, the coaching staff, and everybody else. And this ends up not being that big of a deal for the Bruins. But like I said, I think some really interesting things I saw on here for the Bruins. Their penalty kill is below average. We're not used to seeing that. The Bruins usually have a very good penalty kill. It's below league average this season. Power play well below average. The average right now in the league is about 20%. Bruins are right around 14 to 15% on the power play. So that's not good either. So the Bruins, just in the key categories, they're not scoring enough. They're not keeping the puck out of the net enough. Their penalty kill is not used to the standard up there in Boston, and neither is their power play. And you put all that combination of things together, the fact they have a 6-6-1 record, that's probably where they should be with where they're rated in other categories right now. And like I said, you'd like to see a little bit more depth scoring from some of your other guys on this team and just see those guys kind of coming together. It's nice to see Justin Brazeau. He's already got 4 goals on the season. That's really good to see. Kastelik's got 3 goals, right? There's some guys on this team that are playing well, but you need to see a little bit more for this Bruins team. And like I said, this is a big season for Jeremy Swayman too. He obviously has a lot of pressure, considering the fact that this is a guy that we know what has been the scenario there. The last 2 years, it's been Ullmark and Swayman. Now it's just Swayman, and that's a lot of pressure to put on him. And Korpisalo's played fairly well already for the Bruins, but it's a different beast when you talk about having to be the guy. And Jeremy Swayman is the guy. And his numbers are kind of showing that. He's below a 900 save percentage. And his goals against average is over 3 goals a game. This is an adjustment period for the Bruins. And you'd rather be having this adjustment period now in October and November than once we get into, say, February and March, right? Pretty easy to assess that. They have some time to figure this out. Their record isn't tanking. It's not like they're on a 6-game losing streak. It's nothing like that. But, the clock's ticking here at the end of November. We know that story, right? Going into American Thanksgiving, if teams are in the playoffs, pretty likely they're going to be in the playoffs come April. So that's going to be the scenario for the Bruins. If they could be in a playoff spot in November, late November, they should feel pretty good about themselves, despite what happened earlier this season. I think that's very doable for this Boston Bruins team. But I want to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What do you guys think of the Boston Bruins? Do you think this is a good season for the Bruins where they continue their playoff success and make it back to the playoffs? Or do you think this is maybe the year where they reset a little bit, they take a step back, and they might even miss the playoffs? I want to know what you guys think. Guys, as always, thank you so much for watching today's video, and I'll see you again in the next one. Peace out.